Welcome to another installment in the California Building Standards Commission's educational video series. I am Irina Brausman, Associate Architect with the Building Standards Commission, and in this video you will learn about how many different types of adoptions and amendments are made to create the California Building Standards Code, also known as Title 24. And how matrix adoption tables can help you navigate and apply building codes within Title 24. If you'd like to know more about the California Building Standards Commission and its charge to administer the process that results in the publication of Title 24, watch our videos titled About the California Building Standards Commission, about the CBSC rulemaking process, and about Title 24, found on our Education and Outreach webpage. This particular video assumes some familiarity with Title 24 and how it's organized and published. Also, please note that during this video, the acronym CBSC will be used to refer to the California Building Standards Commission. National model codes are the foundation of most parts of Title 24. Every 3 years, California state agencies adopt and amend building codes developed and published by 3 different organizations: International Code Council, International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials, and National Fire Protection Association. These organizations are known as ICC, IAPMO, and NFPA, and I will refer to them using these initials in this video. As you can see on this slide, Parts 2, 2.5, 9, and 10 are based on the ICC developed model codes. Part 3 is based on the NFPA developed model code, and parts 4 and 5 are based on the IAPMO developed model codes. Only 5 of all parts that make up Title 24 are California-only regulations, which are developed by several California state proposing and adopting agencies. Part 1 is kind of marching orders for the state agencies. It's largely related to their operational needs, and each agency has its own chapter there. Part 6 is developed by one agency only, California Energy Commission, and was established at the time when there was no model code available. Part 8 is promulgated solely by the California State Historical Building Safety Board, and there is no model code. Part 11 is developed by several agencies and contains green building standards for California. Part 12 contains various reference standards that are not referenced in the model codes, but adopted by state agencies and referenced throughout other parts of Title 24. As you may notice, Part 7 is missing. This part used to be Elevator Safety Code, but was removed from Title 24 a number of cycles ago. California state policy and legislation influence California codes and amendments developed for inclusion in Title 24. Several state agencies are given mandates to amend the model codes and create new building standards. For instance, the Department of Housing and Community Development develops and amends building standards for residential occupancies, such as single-family homes, apartments, and hotels. The Division of the State Architect is responsible for building standards for public schools and community colleges. The State Fire Marshal has responsibility for fire and life safety regulations for all occupancies. The California Energy Commission writes and amends energy standards in the Energy Code. Many other agencies have authority to develop and amend building codes for their areas of influence as assigned by law. Sections 1.2 through 1.14 in Chapter 1 of the California Building Code illustrate each state agency's scope of application within the part. There are sections in the other parts of Title 24 that are similar to these California Building Code sections. Because of the mixture of model and California-specific text within the codes, various methods are employed to help the code user understand the source of the regulations and how to apply them. These are standard and italic text styles, margin markings, two types of banners, one for ICC committees and the other one for California state agencies, and matrix adoption tables that we call MAT. Each of these methods is described in detail at the beginning of each part of Title 24, and becoming familiar with them will help ensure the correct application of the code to the project at hand. This video offers a brief look at these aids for the code user. We can start with the text styles. In model-based parts of Title 24, italics are used to indicate California amendments, and the model code text is printed upright. In California-only parts of Title 24, you will not see any italics, because there is no model text from which to distinguish. Marginal markings include double and single vertical lines, arrows, bullets, and asterisks. ICC, IAPMO, and NFPA use slightly different margin marks in the codes they publish. For example, in the ICC published codes shown on this slide, vertical lines indicate where changes have been made to the code language since the last publication. Arrows indicate the deletion of the previously existing code language, and asterisks indicate relocation of the language within the code. IAPMO and NFPA may use different markers, which is why it's a good idea to always review the preface pages of a codebook before utilizing it. Now, let's talk about banners. There are two types of banners. One is for model code committees, and the other one is for California state agencies. Model code committee banners are used to identify model code development committees responsible for portions of this code, and are useful for people interested in participation in the model code development process, which is totally separate from the California code adoption process. California state agency banners serve as markers for California amendment to highlight regulations for specific applications and may include multiple agencies if they co-adopt a code for a certain occupancy or application. Not every California amendment has a banner though, as there are too many California amendments in the code to banner them all. When there is no state agency acronym banner within the text of the California amendment, it generally means that the only one state agency has adopted that amendment, and the adoption is identified only in the MAT. And the application of the amendment is obvious, even without using the banner, such as State Fire Marshal, amendments for fire and life safety. Knowing state agency acronyms and applications, as well as ICC code committees, is necessary to make sense of banners. Fortunately, all this information is provided at the front of every part of Title 24. When looking at the examples provided on this slide, the highlighted banners indicate that Structural Code Development Committee and Administrative Code Development Committee are responsible for development of joint and jurisdiction definitions on the left and on the right. That the Division of the State Architect and Department of Housing and Community Development have adopted Section 1009.3 and added to it based on their authority and the state status behind the provision. Division of the State Architect and Department of Health Care, Access and Information developed and adopted definition of irregular structure. Before we talk about matrix adoption tables, let's take a look at some of the many different types of amendments in Title 24. Taking model codes and making them fit California is not straightforward, and it's not easily done. There are many different types of amendments in Title 24 that agencies have to make, mainly to enact California legislation and eliminate conflicts with existing California laws and regulations. When California does not adopt a model code section, but wants a section number to remain in the code, there are two methods to address it. The first example on this slide shows that reserved method when the model provision is stricken and replaced by the term reserved. Note the use of italics to indicate that the reserved section is a California amendment to the model code text. Another way for California to continue using the model code section numbers is to strike and backfill, meaning replacing model text with California text. We can see how it's done in the second example here. Both of these amendments are not indicated by margin marking, but shown with italic text, as are all California additions and amendments to the model code. Using these two methods allows us to maintain consistent section numbering and to prevent unintended renumbering of the entire chapter. When the model text is deleted without that being reserved or replaced with California amendment, there is a bold arrow or bullet margin mark. This margin mark is also used to indicate difference between current and previous editions of the model code, where model code text has been deleted from the current model code edition by the publisher. If not for the bold arrow margin mark when reading 2022 California Building Code, it would seem the model text is printed all the way through without changes. There have been times when an amendment that is not adoption of model code from a prior cycle is accidentally left in and printed in the new edition of Title 24. These types of amendments are difficult to spot, especially when you have over 5,000 pages to monitor and over 15 agencies involved in the process. California Building Standards Commission appreciates hearing from the code user if something like this is found in the code. Another type of California amendment is a pointer. Pointers refer a user to other parts of Title 24 for additional California-only requirements, such as these typical pointers in the California Building Code, referring the code user to CalGreen, California Fire Code, and California Existing Building Code. Note the use of italics and sometimes a banner. As the codes evolve, sometimes the model code developers move sections and tables around. To help code users identify when sections have been moved, marks are placed in the margins. Depending on the publisher, they can be asterisks or double arrows. There is also a table provided in the margin markings section at the beginning of each codebook that shows which sections have been relocated and possibly renumbered from one edition to the next. State agencies track changes to model codes that affect California codes. Because California is required to adopt the model codes, it's essential to know where applicable sections have been moved. Since we have to move California amendments too, and it's not automatic, if text is removed from the model codes, there may be a California amendment that now modifies nothing. Therefore, depending on California's need to keep or delete the amendment, the appropriate state agency will need to propose a new amendment to include the old model code text or repeal the amendment. During every triennial code adoption cycle, CBSC and other state agencies must check against the last edition of Title 24 to make sure all previous amendments that were not repealed get incorporated into the new edition. That includes all previous amendments from 2, 3, or 5 cycles ago. Let's use California Building Code section 407.2.5, item 4 as an example. Two words in the 2015 International Building Code are marked with highlight, and they were replaced by the same California amendments in 2016, 2019, and 2022 CBC. From the margin marks for the section shown here, you can say that item 4 is a new item added in 2015 IBC. Then, a new California amendment was added in 2016 CBC, and there were no changes to this item since then. Carry forward is a concept that's difficult to keep smoothly flowing, and errors sometimes happen, especially with the ghost amendments I talked about earlier. In this example on the slide is the same section 407.2.5 that at some point didn't make the transfer, and the model text that was stricken by the agency several cycles ago got left behind and printed. Errata are issued to correct non-substantive errors in the published edition of Title 24. The model code developers also issue errata with corrections and updates to the existing model code and incorporate all the fixes in the next printing of their code. There can be several printings of the same model edition. However, what model code developers see as errata is not always what California considers errata. So all the model code changes can't be incorporated into the next printing of California codes. Some of those changes may have what California considers a regulatory impact. And for California, all changes other than simple grammar, spelling, and referencing must go through the public process of rulemaking. Model-based parts of Title 24 are based on the first printing of the models, and if the model errata can't be included in the California errata, it has to wait till California supplement pages are published. CBSC occasionally may issue an information bulletin to inform the regulated community about an error in the model code that California cannot adopt at that time due to California rulemaking process requirements. CBSC can then administer the rulemaking process to enact the regulatory update during the intervening code cycle that results in supplements to the current edition. The supplements are published on January 1st and become effective on July 1st, 18 months after current edition of the Title 24 becomes effective. When California errata is issued, it's printed on buff-colored paper and has words buff and errata and the effective date at the bottom of each page. Electronic versions will only have the text identification at the bottom of the pages since they are not printed. Normally, there is one errata that is effective on the effective date of each new edition of Title 24, but sometimes there is a second one also. When there is a supplement published, such as intervening code supplement, emergency, or change without regulatory effect, the pages are printed on blue paper with the words blue and supplement and the effective date at the bottom of each page. Electronic versions will only have the text identification at the bottom of the pages since they are not printed. Now that you are familiar with the different types of California amendments, let's talk about a special feature added to Title 24 to help code user. Matrix adoption tables that we call MATs. MATs are non-regulatory and included in Title 24 to assist code users to correctly apply the regulations to their projects. Matrix adoption tables are included in all parts of Title 24, except Parts 1, 6, 8, and 12, which are not based on model codes. Part 11, CalGreen, is California-only code, but has matrix adoption tables because of multiple agency authority. To begin, a code user should be familiar with the state agency acronyms shown in the first row of every MAT. Yellow highlight added to the MAT here indicates applications within some of the state agencies. In Title 24, application comes from the authority granted by California legislature. Some agencies have varied applications, so they have additional identifiers to help the code user. For instance, DSA adopts and amends regulations for accessibility, AC, structural safety, SS, and structural safety for community colleges, SS/CC. Some of the applications are regulated by state agencies, are also enforced by those agencies, while others require the local jurisdiction to enforce. Chapter 1 of each part of Title 24 details state agency authority and enforcement for different project types. Then, MAT at the beginning of a code chapter provides information about how the chapter and different sections are adopted and amended by each agency. Some of the acronyms and applications from the MAT will affect specific projects only and will be enforced by state agencies, while others have a wide range of application on many project types and have to be enforced by a local authority having jurisdiction. As an example, ASHPAT and DSA acronyms. The only applications that are enforced by local departments are ASHPAT-free and DSA-AC. You may have a question why BSC acronym is not listed here. And there is a common misunderstanding about application of BSc acronym and banner. So let's try to clarify it right now. BSc acronym applies to state buildings only, including office buildings occupied by state agencies and buildings within the University of California and California State University systems. It's not applicable to all buildings in the state. For example, if the project is for a regular office building, it does not matter whether BSc has an X in the MAT or not. All the Model Code provisions in Title 24 that are not marked as not adopted by the state of California are applicable to that building, while BSc amendments to the Model Code are not applicable unless specifically adopted by the local ordinances. You can learn about BSc authority in Chapter 1 of Title 24 part that is being used. Here on this slide is a typical matrix adoption table from the California Building Code, Part 2 of Title 24. Please note that these and other snippets from the codebooks provided in this video are taken right after 2022 CBC was published on July 1st of 2022 and before errata or supplement pages are issued. There may be changes to this table and other examples provided in the later printings of 2022 edition of Title 24. When looking at this MAT, the right side may be blank due to lack of activity by state agencies in that chapter. In the first row of the table, you can see all the acronyms for state agencies that have authority to adopt and amend regulations in Title 24. The second row, Adopt Entire Chapter, shows that BSc and ASHPAD 3 adopt the entire chapter of the Model Code without amendments, as it applies to occupancies under their authority. The third row shows agencies that adopt the entire chapter, but have amendments in certain sections. Here, HCD1 and HCD2 and other agencies adopt the entire code chapter and then make amendments to the different sections listed in the table. HCD1 and HCD2 amend two sections and do not adopt a specific table. According to Chapter 1, Section 1.8.2.1.1 of the California Building Code, HCD1 applies to hotels, motels, lodging houses, apartments, dwellings, dormitories, condominiums, shelters for homeless people, congregate residences, employee housing, factory-built housing, and other types of dwellings containing sleeping accommodations with or without common toilet or cooking facilities, including accessory buildings, facilities, and uses thereto. And HCD2 applies to permanent buildings in mobile home parks and special occupancy parks. This demonstrates how important it is to know and understand the different applications of each state agency. Finally, the fourth row indicates that only certain sections are adopted and not the entire chapter. So here we see that BSc-CJ and SFM only adopt certain sections of Chapter 14. Again, look at Chapter 1 of each codebook for each agency's authority. You may notice that Section 1409 about plastic composite decking is not listed on this MAT. This means that an agency adopting the whole chapter adopts this section. An agency adopting the whole chapter with amendments adopts this section without any amendments. And an agency adopting only certain sections does not adopt this section. This section is a reference to another chapter of the California Building Code. And because Title 24 applies to all buildings and occupancies within the state, this section is applicable to all buildings and occupancies that consider using plastic composite decking unless specifically not adopted per the matrix adoption table. Now let's look at some specific code sections from this matrix adoption table. When looking at the MAT, we see that BSC adopts the entire chapter, including section 1402.2. BSC-CJ, on the other hand, adopts only section 1402.2.1, which contains a pointer to CalGreen indicated by the BSC-CJ banner and is printed in italics. SFM adopts section 1402 with all its subsections, but not 1402.2.1, which means SFM requires all the model code language, not italics, in subsections of section 1402 to be applied to all occupancies under its authority. And section 1402.2.1 is a typical pointer, which contains a reference to CalGreen indicated by BSC-CJ banner and is printed in italics. We also see that HCD adopts the entire chapter with amendments in two sections, and they do not adopt one table. Their amendment to section 1404.3.2 is shown here, and it replaces the requirements of the model code with HCD requirements that should be applied to all occupancies regulated by HCD 1 and 2. Note the use of the banner and italics. And here, same chapter 14 MAT again. Table 1404.3.3, which should actually be table 1404.3 parenthesis 3 parenthesis. This is the table that is not adopted by HCD1 and HCD2, as indicated with an obelisk symbol in the matrix adoption table, which means that the table does not apply to all the occupancies under HCD1 and HCD2 application. Part 9 of Title 24 is the California Fire Code, and there is a difference in its matrix adoption tables because they include a column for Title 19 under SFM acronym. Title 19 is a public safety title within the California Code of Regulations. If there is an X in the Title 19 column, it means that the corresponding section from Division 1 of Title 19 was printed in California Fire Code for the code user's convenience. The corresponding Title 19 sections are listed in MAT in the order that they appear in Part 9. This slide had the same MAT as the prior slide, but showing more of the table, where you can see Title 24 sections adopted by State Fire Marshal and Title 19 provisions reprinted in Title 24 for the user convenience. Here is an example from Part 9, Chapter 3 text. Section 310 is from the Model Code, where SFM inserts Section 3.32 from Title 19 to Title 24, Part 9, Section 310.2. Section 308.5 is printed in italics, which means that it is California amendment to the Model Code added by the State Fire Marshal. As SFM is the only agency that promulgates regulations in Part 9, there is no need for the state agency banner. In addition to knowing the symbols and acronyms in a matrix adoption table, users should always check the notes below the table, if there are any, so applications of these sections are fully understood. For instance, in this table from the California Electrical Code, a diamond shape is used to indicate SFM adoptions for HCD1 and HCD2 occupancies. Now let's talk about appendices. Code appendices contain regulations that are not mandatory unless adopted by a state agency or local jurisdiction. Be sure to check the statement under the title of an appendix, MAT, and application or scope section, if available, to know whether it's mandatory or not and its applicability. For example, Appendix F, rodent proofing, in the California Building Code is not adopted by any state agency, and the note under the appendix title indicates that the provisions contained in this appendix are not mandatory unless specifically adopted by a state agency or referenced in the adopting ordinance. Another example is Appendix P, emergency housing, in the California Building Code. It is adopted by HCD for use only by jurisdictions that specifically adopted in their local ordinance. This ensures that the regulations for emergency housing will be applied uniformly across the state. If a jurisdiction does not need emergency housing, then it does not need to adopt this appendix. Appendix AQ for tiny houses in the California Residential Code is a bit different. It is adopted by the Department of Housing and Community Development. So, if there are tiny houses built in the jurisdiction, this appendix applies. The jurisdiction does not have to adopt it in their ordinance unless they plan to amend it. Some chapters of model codes are not printed or not adopted in certain parts of Title 24, but some of those chapters may be available for use. If a chapter is not printed and its heading says reserved, then it's specifically stricken and is not to be used. There are also chapters that are printed in the code, but marked with not adopted by the state of California, and those chapters may be available for adoption by local jurisdictions in their ordinances. Finally, we recognize that sometimes an error may be accidentally published in a matrix adoption table. As an example, let's check the same Chapter 14 MAT, but from 2019 California Building Code, and look at ASHPAT 2 application. Ashpat 2 is marked as Adopt Entire Chapter without amendments in MAT. However, if you look at the text of the code, there are amendments in sections 1404.1.1 and 1410. We apologize if any confusion is caused by an error and ask that you take the time to verify what's correct. You can do this by looking at the text of the code to see if there is a banner or italics to indicate adoption or amendment by a state agency. Remember, matrix adoption tables are non-regulatory. However, California Code adoptions and amendments published in Title 24 are regulations that have been approved by the California Building Standards Commission. On CBSC website, you can find additional educational resources that are updated on a regular basis. We hope this video has helped you understand various types of adoptions and amendments made by the state agencies, and the purpose and use of different aids, including matrix adoption tables, that can assist you in applying the regulations in Title 24. If you'd like to schedule an interactive session on this topic for your group or organization in order to learn more, please contact our education coordinator at cbsctraining@dgs.ca.gov. Online sessions are available for groups of any size. If you are not clear on the application of a particular section of the code, please call or email CBSC at 916-263-0916 or cbsc@dgs.ca.gov. With questions concerning a building regulated by another state agency, review state agency contact list at dgs.ca.gov/bsc/contact. Also, CBSC appreciates hearing from you if you found an error, so corrections may be included in future errata supplements or editions of Title 24. We also encourage you to subscribe to our mailing list. After signing up, you will receive public meeting and comment period notices, information bulletins, quarterly newsletters, and more. Thank you for taking the time to watch the video. You may send comments or questions to us anytime using the information on your screen.